the Scoundrels, Scallywags, the Seamier side of Georgetown tour, walking tour. You're in the right place. My name is Bill Brown. I'm a park ranger with the National Park Service. And I'd like to give you a little bit of background as to why I'm doing this walk, and then I'll introduce you to Ernest W. Brown. I was doing some research on canal life, and I came across a 1960 National Geographic article that had been written about the C&O Canal by J. Johnson. And in this article, he interviews Major Ernest W. Brown, who started out his career in the Metropolitan Police Department as a foot patrolman here in Georgetown. So that kind of intrigued me. Now, there's no relation between Ernest W. Brown and Bill Brown, but still, the scenario, the timing, and all sort of intrigued me. So I did a little bit more research. I'm a retired law enforcement officer, so I thought this would be a great opportunity to bring Ernest W. Brown, my knowledge of the canal and Georgetown, I'm a native Washingtonian, sort of bring it all together and share it with people to let them know what it was like here on the canal during the decade of the 1870s. That's the period that we're going to be talking about. Now, Ernest W. Brown started out after he clerked for a year at the Agriculture Department as a police officer in 1896, okay? So Ernest, 1896, but he's reflecting back on those 10 years of activity on the canal and in Georgetown, so he's omniscient. He knows everything that happened. He knows, you know, what there is to know, he knows. So when Ernest is introduced, when the hat goes on the head, it's Ernest W. Brown. Any questions and all you have, I'm going to try to answer as if it were in that period, okay? I'll answer any other questions at the end of our walk. The walk last week took an hour and 15 minutes. I was hoping it would just be an hour, but it's about 15 minutes of walking total time, okay? The longest segment is about 3.5 minutes of walking. The shortest is about 15 seconds of walking, okay? We're walking on terrain like bricks, cobblestone, the towpath, and there are a couple sets of stairs. So it doesn't look to me like anyone should have any problem negotiating any of those, okay? That's what we're going to do. I see some people have some water. I have my own supply. It's not too terrible today. If anybody, don't feel compelled to stay the whole hour and 15 minutes. You have something else to do. Each of my little stops tends to stand on its own, but if you do fail out, well, then you'll miss the ta-da at the end, if there is a ta-da, okay? Okay. Now, the only other thing I'd like to do is I'd like to give some credit to some people. Sergeant Nick Brule of the Metropolitan Police Department, with their archives, helped give me some information about Ernest W. Brown. Jerry McCoy, who's the archivist and librarian for the Peabody Room up at the Georgetown branch of the DC Library, was instrumental in providing me with a lot of research. And the staff of the Washingtoniana collection, which is the old Evening Star archives at the Martin Luther King Library downtown. So to not thank those people, it looked like I did this all on my own. I could not have done it without their help, in addition to some of our park rangers here that sort of worked on my program and reviewed some of the items that were in it. So my hat is off to them as well. So before we get underway, are there any questions for Ranger Bill Brown before Ernest comes along?
Who are you?
Who am I?
Yeah.
Or who am I going to be?
No, who are you? Who are you and who were you before? Did you say who you were?
Yeah. Arlette, weren't you listening?
I thought I was taking a photo. Yes. I missed this one.
Okay. Ernest W. Brown, okay, circa 1896, his first year on the police department. Well, it's very interesting that this canal has now been here, fully operational, for about 20 years or so. And as such, not only has it brought commerce to Georgetown, but it has brought a venue for crime and also a means of escape for people that commit these crimes. Let's walk down here under this tree and get some shade, and I'll tell you about some of the things that happen down here around Lock 3 and Lock 4 in Georgetown before we speak up, because the water tends to make some noise coming over the lock. Now, I know some of you citizens of Georgetown are here because you want to know what your police department's doing and how your tax dollars are being spent. I also know that some of you are here because Justice Bucky and Judge Snell down at the police court have ordered you to accompany a police officer on his beat. And you all know who you are. So this is for you to help educate you as to why your police department is important and why you shouldn't break the law. I've compiled some of the more interesting occurrences here in Georgetown along the canal, and I'm going to share them with you, both as citizens and as court-ordered visitors. Many of the instances that happen down the canal and still today involve accidents along the canal. The canal itself was a wonderful means of transportation, but with it came a lot of danger. The canal boat P.J. Smith, a young boy, was up just above Lock 4. He fell in the canal and drowned, and no one lifted a finger to help him. Can you imagine? Terrible. Now the Lady of the Lake was another boat. She was down here in level 3, and her mule was stolen. Now if it were not for the sharp eye of one of the employees at Marcy and Payne's livery stable down the street, a gentleman came in and rented a horse and buggy to go over to Washington City, and he had a mule, and he tied the mule up to the back of that buggy, and that's how we apprehended him after he took off. But it was only through the due diligence of Mr. Marcy at Marcy and Payne that we were able to track down that mule thief. A.B. Mullet, who has a little store up on Green Street at Gay Street, he had 10 of his prize Brahma chickens stolen. Those chickens were worth about $25. Now this type of crime and all has got to stop. Fortunately for us, someone saw the chicken thief up near the Aqueduct Bridge and reported it back to the police station, and one of our officers apprehended that gentleman and returned all but one of those chickens to Mr. Mullet. I don't know what happened to that other chicken. We have lots of mule occurrences on the canal. Mules pulled these boats. There were more than 2,000 mules pulling these 500 boats. This building over here was a mule veterinary hospital. So lots of happenings with mules. We have accidents where mules have fallen into the locks and have recovered, whereas horses have fallen in and have not made their way out. Very interesting that mules would be able to survive that. Mr. Flanagan almost lost his mule that way when the mule got spooked and fell into level 3 here. Now, there's a Master Bowen who was down at Marcy and Payne's livery stable, and he was kicked by a mule, and he was kicked into insensibility. Now, some of the doctors attended him said that they're sure he'll recover from his injury, but not sure to what degree he will recover. Alex Grummel was another mule victim. He was kicked in the midsection, and he didn't think too much of it, and their canal boat made it all the way down to the Washington Navy Yard, where he began to complain of some pain, and then died of his injuries a few hours later. Master Clayton Moran fell into Lock 3 right here, and he was rescued because an alert person went in after him and helped him before he went down for a third time. We had a rather sad case of a young accountant that lived up on Bridge Street. He was getting off of one of the newfangled streetcars that we have here in Georgetown. The streetcars, of course, are like carriages that are pulled on rails by horses. And he was stepping from that streetcar, getting off his job over in Washington City. This is David Walling. And he misstepped, and the streetcar rolled over him and created great injuries to his lower extremities. The doctors are not sure that they can save his leg. There has been, however, a fundraiser up the street at the Masonic Hall for folks to contribute money to help ease him on his road to recovery. There were lots of injuries along the waterfront. Anthony Kuhn worked in a cooper's shop, and a staircase fell on him. George White, who was a boat captain, was arrested for shooting Albert Crane in the head with a shotgun. Albert's crime was he'd been throwing rocks at George and on his boat. Well, interestingly enough, Albert is expected to survive. We're not sure what the fate of George White will be. He's having a meeting with Judge Snell down in the police court. Henrietta Bruce was found floating face down in Lock 3 here. We thought a victim of a drowning. Now, the post-mortem examination by Dr. Kleinsmith showed that she had an abrasion to her head. Other people came forward and said that they had heard Edward Hill arguing with her several days earlier and threatening her life. So we took Edward Hill into custody. He swore he knew nothing about this. Finally, upon re-examination of the post-mortem records, the doctors determined that the blow to Henrietta's head would not have been sufficient to cause her death. Therefore, her death was caused by drowning. The circumstances of her drowning still unknown. Edward Hill was let off only with the charge of carrying a concealed weapon. He had a pistol tucked in his belt when he was taken into custody. Up on Thomas Jefferson Street, where we're going to cross in just a minute, Saxey Butler was shot to death by William Pope. They were both two notorious gentlemen that resided here in Georgetown. We don't know what prompted the argument or the fight, but Saxey got the short end of the deal, and he is being tended to by Mr. Birch at Birch's funeral home. There have been many sad cases of abandoned and drowned children and babies. Many times we get reports, and we report to the medical examiner that newborn babies are found in Rock Creek down here at the mouth of the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. In one case, Mary Canaan was a domestic. We found that she had slit her newborn's throat. She's taken into custody and is awaiting trial. With that, we're going to walk up to the site of the 3rd District Police Station. It's on High Street. We're going to walk along the sidewalk here and a piece of the canal towpath and up some stairs, and if you would, please follow me. Right next to the Vigilant Firehouse. 17 officers and 1 sergeant assigned to the station. That means that on our night shift, there are only 4 officers working, 1 in each quadrant of Georgetown. So as you can see, our resources are very slim. To the victim, this police station represented sanctuary, someplace that they could come when they were in need. To the evildoer, it represented punishment and confinement. But for those of us that work at the station, it represented and represents a way of life. I'll give you some idea of the statistics that have passed through and been created by this station. In the last quarter, we had 277 arrests of misdeed doers, 91 fines imposed, 8 cases were closed. 8 cases were sent to court. $352 in fines were collected, and our officers recovered $2,158 in stolen property. The population, you know, is just about 12,500. Now, our officer Harper was in pursuit of Henry Taylor for disorderly conduct. And they ran down High Street near Henry Taylor to escape our officer's grasp, jumped into the Potomac River, and has never been heard from again. He's presumed drowned. Now, not all of our stories here in Georgetown are tales of woe. There's a rather honest lad, Samuel Kohler. He recovered a lady's purse up at the Union Hotel. Union Hotel was down at Green and Bridge Street. He brought the purse here to the police station, and it will be here for someone to claim, and if after 6 months no one claims it, it will become the property of the city. Now, we've had a number of complaints about rowdy boys up at Frederick and 3rd Street. And it's believed that some of those rowdy boys are probably the progeny of some rather prominent Georgetown citizens. Well, I'll tell you what, a night in a cell here at the 3rd District will teach them their lesson. There was a sad case of young Joseph Kennelly. He was a young street fiddler that had decided to take up part-time work on a canal boat coming down from Cumberland. So he was providing his services to the canal boat family. And when he stepped off the boat to take the snubbing line and tie around the post, with that boat full of weighing 140 tons, 120 tons of coal, the snubbing line got caught around his leg and put his leg between the line and the post, and broke his leg and caused extreme mortification to his leg. It's very unlikely that Dr. Kleinschmidt will be able to save the young man's leg. Now, everyone thinks they're so sophisticated down here in Georgetown these days. Well, just the other day, we had a stampede of steers come down High Street and across Bridge Street. People were jumping onto their porches and balconies to get out of the way. Now, when these drovers are ever going to learn to use Road Street at the top of the hill, rather than bringing their cattle through here, a few of them need to be fined, and believe me, we're looking out for them because we're going to put a stop to them. Now, speaking of horses and cattle, there's been an outbreak of equine epizootic. Now, interestingly enough, the epizootic's been affecting the horses in the area, but the mules seem to be particularly immune to it. So there's something to be said for the mules. Now, has anyone here been feeling ill lately? Because you might want to see one of the local doctors, make sure you don't have the epizootic. Now, to set everyone's mind at ease, we've only had one reported case of smallpox. Only one, and that was up at the Uphoff's house on Bridge Street, just down here across from the market. Well, we were relieved to find out that the person with the smallpox came here from Philadelphia. So they brought the smallpox with them. It certainly didn't start with any of our fine citizens or because of any of our conditions down here in Georgetown. Don't worry, we flagged the house so that people can cross to the other side of the street and not breathe the air that the smallpox victim is breathing. Now, while we're on the case of animals, hydrophobia has been a big problem. There was a young man and his son, Armistead Havener, and his 4-year-old son. His son was playing with a puppy, and the puppy nipped the young lad's hand. This caused great concern. They thought that this dog might have hydrophobia, and their fears were confirmed when they took a plate of water and put in front of the dog, and the puppy went into convulsions. Obviously, the dog was carrying hydrophobia. Mr. Havener took his son, put him in a wagon, and drove all the way out to Aldie, Virginia, to have the Madstone applied. And the Madstone was applied to them, and you know that they did not come down with hydrophobia. It's a miracle. Now, some people say the Madstone is just a piece of pumice that you can rub on your hand. Well, any of our doctors here in Georgetown have it, but the one out in Aldie was said to have special properties. Obviously, it does. Havener and young Master Havener survived their bout with the rabies-infected puppy. Now, the police themselves aren't immune to crime. James Johnson and Michael Crowley, on 2 separate occasions, passed through this very police station and stole Officer Green's and Officer Burroughs' coats. We've had some sad instances happen right here in the police station. Elijah Sullivan was a cigar maker. He worked for one of the tobacconists up on High Street. He had been picked up on a charge of disorderly conduct. He was found hanging in his cell. There must have been other problems other than alcohol that would have led this man to do something so desperate. Frederick Hall died suddenly in the cell right back over there. The medical examiners, upon their examination of his body, concluded that he died of severe congestion of the brain. Poor Mary Beach, she was in a cell. She was smoking when she should not have been, because we do not allow smoking by our prisoners in our cells. And her clothes caught on fire. And before Officer Wheelock and Officer Wheeler could get to her, she was fully enveloped in flames and died several hours later. Now, we regret to report that Officer Miles, 35 years old, a 7-year veteran of our department, died of dropsy and heart disease. And also Officer Charles Hospital, 43 years old, was a 9-year veteran of our department. He passed away recently of typhoid fever. Officer Green's little boy was injured in a fall down at the ice house. Now, recently, the report of the Board of Commissioners to the city commissioners, the police commissioners to the city commissioners, had some recommendations. They brought to the commissioners' attention the fact that we need to increase our police force. We need to implement system liquor licenses. We need to fight coppering, thievery, and the poor work conditions here at this police station. With that, we're going to go over to Grace and Cecil Street and talk about some of the issues that occur over there. The alley, alcohol, gambling, and prostitution coexisted with people from all walks of life just trying to eke out a living here in Georgetown. This area, south of the canal, is the more notorious area, and I would advise you ladies not to be back here unescorted at night. Right up here at the corner of High Street and Grace, Officers Harper, Augustus Brown, no relation, and Officer Sebastian, over a series of couple of nights, arrested Dick Williams and charged him with maintaining a disorderly house. Along with Mr. Williams, Nellie Holmes, Nellie McPherson, and Annie Gresham were arrested, as were Albert Crane and Edward Preston. They will all be having appointments with Judge Snell by way of the Black Maria. Now down here, around the corner in Cherry Alley, Lieutenant Hurley and his men arrested 12 men and 3 women at the Stone Jug, a notorious bar. Well, it was more of a homemade bar, sort of a speakeasy. They were so successful that night, they went back the next night and took another pull at the Brown Jug and arrested 3 more people. All those people were transported down to what we like to refer to as the Blue Jug, which is the District of Columbia jail, because it has a blue tint to it, if you've ever seen it. John Harper and Mag Murphy got in a call, Carl. You don't know what it was over. Mag was stabbed several times in her back. And you know, that woman walked all the way up to the 3rd District Police Station to report the crime. Officers got a warrant from Justice Bucky and took John Harper into custody. Dr. Kleinsmith attended to Mag's wounds and sent her off to the sanatorium. Her wounds may be fatal. He applied restoratives, though, and we hope that that will help see her through to the trial. Now down at Grace and Potomac Street, there was a stabbing at a policy house. Alfred Stone and Lloyd Smith were both denizens of Water Street down at the bottom of the hill. They got in a fracas. Stone fled to Boggy Bottom down across Rock Creek. He was pursued by Lieutenant Hurley's men, who finally made apprehension and brought him back to Dr. Kleinschmidt, a very busy doctor, dressed the wounds and pronounced them not of a serious nature. Down in Cherry Alley again, John Smith cut Edward Brooks with a razor. Officer Sturgis arrested Smith and spirited him off to Judge Snell down in the D.C. Police Court. Very, very, very active area. We're going to walk down to the fish market. On the Georgetown and Washington Railroad, that they generally have to cross Rock Creek and go to a ticket vendor down on Pennsylvania Avenue, get a ticket to ride the very streetcar system that takes them to and from work. Well, be careful what you wish for, because the Washington and Georgetown and Washington Railroad system built this monstrosity here to house their horses and the grain for the horses to eat. The horses, of course, pulling the streetcars, and they built their car barn on the other side of the canal. So now we have these 2 giant edifices here, operated by the Georgetown and Washington Railroad. You can see, the Georgetown waterfront is just a block away. Thieves and pirates preyed on the sailing ships and their crews that docked here in Georgetown like gulls on schools of fish. We've had numerous instances of pirates at work. Over the last several nights, no less than 6 vessels were boarded by thieves and robbers and relieved of money, watches, and valuables. The schooner Emily Birdsall was boarded, and the captain robbed of his watch and his account book, but more importantly and sadly, his banjo. He believes he was chloroformed for them to get the drop on him. Another attempt by river pirates, this time against the ship, the J.R. Bodwell, where $16 was taken in an unsuccessful attempt against the Frederick Fish, which was docked next to her. Sailors, particularly down here on the Georgetown waterfront, better have their revolvers handy. Poor Mary Tucker drowned when she fell into the canal from the Potomac Street Bridge here. She was very much intoxicated, and the coroner deemed that an inquest into her death would not be necessary. Happily, Sergeant Hess, our very own sergeant, shift sergeant, was on hand when he heard the cries for help of a young man who had fallen into the canal while fishing. He was going down for a third time when Sergeant Hess doffed his coat, dove in, and saved the young lad. He should get a medal. Officer Harper broke up a fight between two canal boatmen, Charlie Engel and Jeffrey Dick. Well, they'll settle their differences with Judge Snell.
Is he the only judge?
Judge Snell works day and night. Yes, madam. Judge Snell is the judge of our police court, which is a lower level court for violations. If they were felonies, they would go to the circuit court or the federal court over in the city of Washington.
For 12,000 people who live here.
For all the people that live here in Georgetown.
12,000 people.
But Judge Snell also handles all the misdemeanor cases from Washington City as well. He's very busy. Justice of the Peace Bucky issued warrants for deserters from the vessel A.H. Howe. They were located at the B&O Railroad Depot over on B Street in the city and returned to the vessel. I'm sure that captain will met out some punishment appropriately. In the 1870s, I told you people complained that they couldn't get a ticket to their railroad, to their streetcars, and now you can see these two buildings that have arisen to provide for the transportation needs of our small village here. Now, we had a young gentleman named White, I'm not sure of his first name is unknown, who broke away from Officer Sebastian back near the station house where we just left. And he ran around the market and around the car barns, and he jumped off the wall over here, you can see, down onto this plaza below. Okay, that's about a 15-foot drop. And when we're up there in a few minutes, you can look to see how far that is. Wow. The young man, still in an effort to get away, jumped down to the towpath, lost his footing, and fell in the canal. Officer Sebastian retrieved him from the canal and took him from his watery sanctuary to the sanctuary of a nice dry cell at the 3rd Police District. All these buildings behind you, the mills, the flour mill, paper mill, sawmill, there were a number of injuries that occurred here which have to be reported to us so that we can determine that they occurred as an accident and not as a result of any ill deed. Well, Jacob Walker was sewing bags of fertilizer at the bone mill of F.L. Moore. His clothing got caught in a shaft, and he was spun around, and if it were not for the quick thinking of one of his co-workers who shielded his head from another beam every time he came around, he would have suffered terrible injuries. As a result, his arm was terribly crushed and will probably need to be amputated. But his co-worker saved his life by shielding his head from that beam as he spun around on that shaft. Charles Sigmund of Hare and Sissel's mill over here on Grace Street, he was caught in the massive cogs of the mill and was crushed to death. All 4 local doctors attended to him and could do nothing but sew him up after he passed away and ship his remains off to Mr. Birch's funeral establishment. With that, let's wander down to Frederick Street.